In Mark chapter 3, beginning with verse 20, we read, "Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, 'He's out of his mind.' And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, 'He's possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he casts out the demons.' And he called them to him, and said to them in parables, 'How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is coming to an end. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man. Then indeed he may plunder his house. Truly I say to you, all sins will be forgiven the children of man, and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they were saying, 'He has an unclean spirit.' And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, 'Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you.' And he answered them, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother.'" When Jesus goes home to the city of Capernaum at this point in Mark's story, appreciate what a consequential few days he's been having. Great crowds have been pressing in on him as his fame has gone across all of Israel. He's gone and appointed his 12 apostles, the single most significant decision of his earthly ministry. But now, as Jesus gets home, that great crowd closes in, and he's so pressed that they can't even eat while they're at home. Do you ever have times that feel like that? Where you're busy and overwhelmed and you're surrounded by people who all seem to want something from you. They all seem to have their own agenda. Well, appreciate what we can gather from this glimpse of Jesus in that sort of situation. Because he has his mother and his brothers and sisters coming, and they come convinced he's lost his mind. He's got the religious elite, the scribes, the experts in interpreting the law, the scriptures of those days. And they're saying that he's possessed by demons. Now appreciate, they weren't denying that Jesus was doing remarkable things. The issue here wasn't whether or not he was actually healing sick people, whether or not he was actually casting out demons. That was irrefutable. The evidence was overwhelming. No, what they wanted to say, because they didn't agree with Jesus, was that he must be doing that by the power of the devil. They acknowledged that something was happening, but for Jesus to be doing it, it must be from the forces of evil. So Jesus calls them to him. Jesus engages them in dialogue, but he exposes how foolish that was. They might be learned when it came to interpreting the Hebrew scriptures, but what they were saying there about him didn't make any sense. What would the devil have to gain? What did Satan want from having demons cast out of people? That didn't make any sense. But Jesus reveals just what exactly all of this casting out of demons that Mark has highlighted so much really was about. That if you bind the strong man, you can plunder him. Jesus was rescuing people. People that had been in bondage, people who were oppressed, all of these demons that he was casting out. It was about rescuing them from the powers of evil and delivering them to a life of freedom with God, which was not something that the religious authorities should be disparaging. It's not something that they should be falsely accusing Jesus over, and the fact that they were was very serious. This wasn't just a difference of opinion. If they looked at God's power, the power of his Holy Spirit being worked through Jesus, but said, "Oh no, that's not God. That's not the Holy Spirit. That's Satan doing that," then what hope was there that they could be forgiven? If they were willing to look at such incredible evidence of God at work and call it evil, how could they be right with God? How could they ever be forgiven? They might know an awful lot about the Bible, but as long as that was their perspective, they were lost. So when Jesus' family, who Mark has already told us were only coming to join that crowd at the house because they had no idea what he was doing, but they were hearing these things about him and they were seeing these disruptive crowds gathering around him, and they thought, he's lost it. We've got to bring him home. We've got to put a stop to this. When they're standing outside calling for him, Jesus doesn't go. Because while he loves his family, he loves and honors his mother, he loves his brothers and sisters. We see that throughout the gospel accounts. While that mother and those siblings would be among his earliest followers eventually, at this point, their agenda, what they're there for, is not the agenda that God has given to Jesus. So he makes that clear. He makes that clear when, instead of going out to them knowing they just want to stop him from doing what God has put him there to do, he says that whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. In Jesus' eyes, that is what matters most in our lives. Not what other people think of us, not what our own family wants from us. God's will matters most. And that can be hard for us to hear. If we don't truly believe that Jesus is God's Son, if we don't truly trust that he is good, that he is worthy of our complete devotion, that might be too much for us. But Jesus is worth it. There's so much evidence from the power that he wielded to bring people to freedom, to rescue them from oppression, to heal them of what ailed them. And if we will follow him, if we will trust him completely, if we won't make excuses for disregarding the things that he says, if we won't in our panic try to pull back from what he says, to try to get him to tone it down, but if we will go and do God's will like he did, without being concerned about what those around us might think, even those closest to us, then we will experience true family from being in relationship with God, from being in relationship with everyone who knows and loves God. Jesus had a home. It wasn't with the religious establishment. They accused him of being demon-possessed. At this point, it wasn't with his own biological family. They thought he was crazy. But Jesus had a home, even in the midst of all that was going on, because he was clear on what God's will was. And he knew that everyone who was committed to doing that will with him was his family. And that's his invitation to us. You can find a home with Jesus. You can find brothers and sisters with his people whenever you completely focus yourself on doing God's will. Jesus has a place for you, and you